We're called to be missionaries for Jesus. I wanted to talk about that today and to ask you the question, how do you view your life? What is God's plan for your life? And we'd like to discover that, but I ask you first to bow your heads with me in prayer. Dear God in heaven, you've given us life, you've given us purpose, you've given us the opportunity to be missionaries. People that will give other people hope. Because you gave us hope, you want us to give hope. You've given us Christ, you want us to give Christ to others. I pray, Lord, that today your Holy Spirit will kindle in our hearts, not just the possibility, but the reality of being missionaries for Christ. Here where we are, for Christ's sake, I pray. Amen. Isaiah 42. Who is it about? It's always about Jesus, and it's about you. How your life can be more. More of what? More fulfilled, more meaning, more like the life that Jesus lived when he was on earth. Are you interested? Let's take a closer look at this passage in Isaiah 42. And looking at verse 5 again, where God is speaking, and he says, God the Lord created the heavens. Beautiful way in which Sonia depicted that for us today. And stretched out the skies. He created the earth and everything in it. Now I want to invite all of you to read the last two lines with me, where it says, He gives breath to everyone, life to everyone who walks the earth. Everyone, does that include you? Do you feel included yet in this passage? God includes all of us in giving us breath, in giving us life. So what is the purpose of this life that God gives us? What is its intention? What does God have in mind in giving life to now on earth 7 billion people? Or what about the billions that have been living on this earth for the centuries that have gone past? What is that purpose? Well, we'll find out while we listen in on God the Father speaking directly to Jesus, his Son, the Messiah. And that takes us to verse 6 of Isaiah 42. This is now God the Father speaking to Jesus. And if you listen carefully, you'll discover your purpose, God's purpose for you. Here it is. I, the Lord, have called you. This is God saying to Jesus the Messiah, I have called you to demonstrate my righteousness. In other words, I have called you to show the world that I am just. As a God, the God of the universe, I am a just God. You are to demonstrate my righteousness. Then God says to his Messiah, his Son, I will take you by the hand and guard you. He's saying, I will be responsible for you, and I will see to it that nothing deters you from the purpose that I have called you for. The devil will try and derail you to keep you from providing salvation from the world. But I will take you by the hand and I will guard you, says God the Father to God the Son. Then he says, and I will give you to my people, Israel, as a symbol of my covenant with them. Can you see what God is saying here? I want you to be among my people. I'm giving you to them. He's referring to Calvary. Because there on Calvary, he would set in motion the new covenant for his people, saying to his people, I am a faithful God. I will stick with you. Even if it takes the life of my son, I am that kind of God. And then look at the final part where he says, you will be a light to guide the nations. And obviously, that's talking about Jesus being the light of the world, where he would take the message of the gospel into the world starting at Calvary. Now, what we have seen here in this passage of Isaiah 42, verse 5, is everything about Jesus condensed in these key words. The key words are called, righteousness, God's hand, and the covenant, and light to the nations. Those key words summarize or condense everything that Jesus did, his purpose, and he fulfilled his purpose perfectly. We know that. This text condenses it, says it in a nutshell. This is Jesus, and he fulfilled it perfectly. Would you say amen to that? That is Jesus. Now, here's what's amazing. This purpose, this very same purpose that God has given his son Jesus, he also gave to Israel, his people. Now, that's an amazing order. It's an amazing thing that God would actually have the same thing in mind for Israel, his people, as he has for Jesus, the Messiah. And to show that to you, going back to Isaiah 41 now, verse 8 through 10, where God is speaking about Israel, he says, "But as for you, Israel, my servant," he referred to Jesus as the Messiah, as his servant, in the earlier verses of chapter 42. But here in 41, he calls Israel his servant, Jacob my chosen one, descended from Abraham my friend. I have called you. There it is again, the same thing that he said about Messiah. I have called you back from the ends of the earth, saying, you are my servant, for I have chosen you and will not throw you away. Don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my righteous right hand. Exactly the same as God had said about Jesus the Messiah. There it is, his right hand, the hand of power. He will hold up his people. He will guard them. What a beautiful description here, that God gives the same purpose to Israel as he gave to Messiah. Question is, how did Israel do? How did they live it out? Did they demonstrate the righteousness of God? Did they in fact live as the light to the nations? Were they faithful to the purpose that God gave them? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. Israel failed. Israel let God down. What Israel was supposed to do, they failed at doing. And that's why the Messiah comes, Jesus, and he takes the purpose God gave to Israel and he embodies that purpose. He makes it real. He makes it genuine. He fulfills it perfectly. Jesus is God's faithful servant. In the place of Israel, where they failed, Jesus succeeded. Now, here's what's most awesome to me. There is more. It's the purpose that God had for Messiah that makes us where we are today. It's the same purpose God gave to Israel, but they failed. But then, the Bible teaches that that very same purpose for Messiah and for Israel, the Holy Spirit stands ready to make that purpose real through the lives of the Christian people, the Christian church. That's you and me. That same purpose is for us. Let's discover it. We are believers in Jesus, followers of Jesus. Let's apply it to us. Let's see if that sublime purpose that God had for Israel, where they failed and where Jesus in their place succeeded, and now is the same purpose given to us. Let's see how we apply that purpose to ourselves. So we go to 1 Peter Because there in chapter 2, verse 9 is given the same wording in effect to us, the New Testament people, the followers of Jesus, as he gave to Israel and as he gave to Jesus. And there he says, "You are my chosen people. You are royal priests," and that's where the covenant comes in. A holy nation, God's very own possession. As a result, you can show others. There it is, the light to the world, to the nations. You can show others the goodness of God. You are demonstrations of God's righteousness, in other words. For he called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light. Oh, friends, this is similar language that he has given to Israel and he's given to Messiah in Isaiah chapter 42. And what I want you to think about is, what does this mean? If he's called us with a sublime purpose, if he's given us that purpose in life, what does it mean? I'll tell you what it means. First of all, it means that we are no different to Israel and we are no different to our Messiah because we have the same purpose as they are. And let me tell you, that is an amazing and a wonderful thing. Our lives matter. There is purpose for our lives. All heaven is watching to see how God's purpose for us is playing out. All heaven is interested. They want to see it. Israel failed. The Messiah came and did it in their place in a perfect way. How will his people in the new covenant time, how will they live out this purpose? All of heaven is interested, watching with rapt attention every single person's life, watching their move, every move that we make, watching. Will God's purpose be fulfilled for them? In 1999, there was a movie called The Truman Show. Remember that? And this fellow, Truman Burbank, was the star of this movie, and he believed that his life was no different to anybody else's. Just like everybody else, he would get out of bed in the morning, go about his business, do his work, go back to bed at night. I mean, he just kind of lived like everybody else. But what Truman Burbank did not realize is that every second of his life since he was born, every second of his life since he was born was telecast to the entire planet. Every single person on planet Earth was given the opportunity to see every aspect of Truman's life. Every move he made, every decision he made, all his actions, everything he said was not just recorded, but it was broadcast. It was recorded by 5,000 cameras placed all over the place where he would move, where he would go, so that his every move was captured by those lenses and then broadcast, telecast, for the whole planet to see every detail of his life. He didn't know it. But he began to realize that something is strange here. He noticed that people around him were acting a little differently towards him than towards others, as if they knew more about him than they knew about other people. This made him uncomfortable until he realized, and this was a life-changing discovery in his life, where he realized that the whole world was eavesdropping on his life, knowing him inside out, watching his every move. That life-changing realization of an unseen audience watching him every moment. Could you think that he would live the same after he realized that he was being watched by the entire globe? It was life-changing. And exactly what happened to Truman is in fact happening to us. Whether we realize it or not. Yes, we don't walk around thinking about it and saying, yes, I know that everyone's watching me. No. But there is an unseen audience who is intent on every move we make, not because they're trying to trip us up, but because they're so interested to see how we would fulfill the plan, the purpose that God has for our lives. They are so intensely interested, rapt with attention. They want to know, how are these people going to make it? We so much don't want them to stumble. We don't want them to make the wrong move. We don't want them to go the wrong way. What can we do to help them? Because as we read in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 13, it says that nothing in all creation is hidden from God. Everything is exposed before His eyes. He is the one to whom we are accountable. Why? Because He's given us that purpose. All heaven is watching. How is God's purpose playing out? So I ask you, friend, what is your purpose in life? Is there a difference between your purpose in life and the purpose that God has chosen for you in your life? That question must settle in our thoughts and settle into our hearts. What is the difference? Well, notice this. God's purpose for you is revealed in a very broad term in Romans 11:36, which says, everything comes from God alone, everything lives by His power, and everything serves His glory. The breath that you have just now taken, God gave it. The blood that has just now pulsed through your heart, He gave it to you. The eyes that you use to see what's in front of you right now, and the ears you use to hear what you are hearing, and the mind, the brain that you use to process it all, God gave it. He gave it. Everything comes from God, and everything exists for God. He not just gives it to us, He gives it to us so that it will be used for His glory, His upliftment. So that, guess what? You are the canvas of His brushstroke. You are the paper for His pen. You are the screen for His graphics. You are the glimpse of His image. He's given us breath, He's given us energy, He's given us life, He's given us a heartbeat, He's given us a mind, all for the purpose, for His glory, to live out His righteousness. What an awesome thing that God has done for us. And you have only one life to live it. We cannot live it over. We cannot hit the redo button. There is no reset button we can press and then start all over again. We have one life only in which to live out the purpose which God has given us. Too bad if we should miss it. And if the Creator, with His infinite mind and His great wisdom, creates us for a purpose, a definite divine purpose, and if we should miss it, what a waste in life it is. What a waste. I plead with you today to take very seriously, yes, that God has a purpose for you, but let's find out what God says about that purpose. And that takes us back to Isaiah chapter 42 and verse 6. And I want you to think not about Israel. I don't want you now to think about Jesus, whom this is describing, but because the same words are repeated for us elsewhere in the Bible, it is now words for you and for me. And so here it is. God is saying to you and to me, I, the Lord, have called you. That's where the purpose begins. I have called you. Think about it. You are called by God. Shouldn't that make us just stand a little taller? Shouldn't that just make us puff out our chests a little more? Shouldn't that just make us walk with a spring in our step? The God of the universe has called us after all. And so often in the Bible, when it says God calls us, it says He calls us by our name. God is calling us. Are we listening? I remember being on an airport far away from home, yes, thousands of miles away from home. Being in this airport crowded with people, not recognizing a single face, Everything is strange around me. And while I'm walking around there in the terminal waiting to board the plane, suddenly I hear my name called. And I'm looking around and I'm saying, first of all to myself, there must be another Ivan Blake around. It can't be me. I am thousands of miles away from home. Somebody is calling my name. It cannot be for me. But it was. Somebody called my name because they recognized me. It just so happened they were on that same airport terminal, on that same airport, in that same country, far away from home, and they recognized me and called my name. One thing I was sure of, it was not a stranger calling my name. It was somebody who knew me. Somebody had had a relationship with me, and we sat down and visited and just amazed ourselves that we should meet there, in that place, at that time. Somehow I think that when God calls us, no matter where we are, we may feel we are thousands of miles away from God. He is calling us by our name. We may be surprised that in those circumstances He's calling us. You know why He's calling us? Because He's no stranger to us. He is calling us because there is a relationship. This thing about God calling us is everything to do with a relationship that God has with us, which He constantly wants to renew and deepen and refresh. He is calling you by name. Another time I heard my name called was I was in Paris, riding in a coach bus with a lot of tourists, and I got sick and tired of just doing everything that they made me do. And I decided I'm going to break loose from the itinerary and the schedule for the day. And so I said to the driver, hey, just stop the bus for a moment. I want to hop out. He did. I saw the Eiffel Tower not very far away, and I knew that that bus was not going to the Eiffel Tower, and I didn't want to miss that. So I made my way to the Eiffel Tower, except for one problem. I'd never been to Paris before. I cannot speak French. And I discovered very quickly that the people in France and in Paris don't like speaking English, even if they can. And after enjoying the Eiffel Tower and all the beautiful scenery of that and taking dozens of rolls of film, those days it was celluloid film, I had to find my way back to the hotel, and I didn't know which way to go. I mean, I had the name of the hotel, and every person I gave the name to, they thought I was swearing at them. I mean, what is this? No one can tell me which direction to go. I was totally lost. I walked more blocks than my shoe soles could tolerate. And I had to just take a chance. Maybe this will be the place. And when I felt utterly lost, feeling like I should call home back in South Africa, what'll that help? Honey, won't you please tell me how I can get to my hotel from the Eiffel Tower inside Paris? What am I going to do? Totally lost. And then someone called my name. Somebody that knew me, that sensed I was lost because I was walking around like a chicken without a head on it. And they said, Ivan! And I knew there was no French Ivan around. I was not in Moscow. And I knew someone called my name because I was lost. Somebody interested in helping lost Ivan find his way. See, that tells me when God calls us, friend, His call is a call to bring us from being lost into being found and to being in a relationship with someone who's not a stranger to us. His purpose for us is that we will be within that relationship when He calls us, no matter where we are, no matter what circumstance we are in. He's calling us because He wants us in a relationship with Himself. Has He called you lately? He's calling you right now because we read it in His Word. That's where our purpose begins. I, the Lord, have called you. And then He says, I have called you to demonstrate my righteousness. Now, you can read that two ways. Where He is saying, I have called you so that by calling you, I will demonstrate my righteousness, that I don't have to call you. You don't deserve it, but I'm calling you because I'm a righteous, just God. And Jesus died in your place so that you now have a right to be called by me. And so I'm showing my righteousness by calling you. We could read it that way. It would not be wrong. But here's another way you could read that. Where God himself is saying to us, listen, I'm not calling you because you are righteous. Because you think the right thoughts, you speak the right words, you make the right decisions all the time, you handle those issues in the right way, you have the right emotions, you have the right motives. He's not calling us because we are right or because we are righteous. Not at all. He is calling us because he is righteous and because he knows that when he calls us into a relationship with him, that his righteousness will then be demonstrated through us. Ah, my friends, God comes to you and he says, I know you're not righteous, but because of your faith in Jesus Christ, I will declare you righteous. So that in my eyes, you are perfectly righteous as Jesus, my son, is. And what's more, I bring you into this relationship with me so that in this relationship, you will be changed. And my righteousness, my rightness will then be demonstrated through your life. What a purpose God has for us. That we should, in fact, demonstrate his righteousness. I tremble even as I think of it. It's a very important truth, this, my friends, for us to think about for a moment. Very important. See, God's purpose for you is not that you demonstrate his righteousness. His purpose for you is to be in a relationship with him that will result in his righteousness being demonstrated through you because of that relationship. Not because you decide one day, well, I now have discovered what is truth. I am now going to choose and decide that my life will change and I'm going to live a right life. You do it by willpower. You do it by resolution. You do it by good action. That is not what God is saying. Because most people who use their willpower to be righteous move on to the next level, which is a level down where they become self-righteous. And God is saying to us, I don't want you to be righteous. I don't want you to demonstrate anybody's righteousness but my own. But you cannot do it until you allow me to declare you righteous and you allow me in my relationship with you to let that righteousness develop in and through you. It is my doing. You notice the text that says, it is my righteousness that you demonstrate. It is not only about me, but it also comes from me. That's the purpose that God has for us. So I want to ask you, friend, quite straightforwardly, do you have the kind of relationship with Jesus that produces the righteousness of God being demonstrated in your life? Is that how it happens? Let me tell you about Paul Powers. When he was 7 years old, his mother died of pneumonia. His father became an alcoholic and beat him up every day, was constantly brutalizing him and abusing this young boy. He's only 7. In order to escape and to get some protection, he joined a street gang, hoping that those guys would protect him. And so he spent his days stealing, fighting on the street. And when he was 12 years old, accidentally he killed a woman. And that meant that he would spend the next 4 years in a juvenile prison. Now you imagine what happens to a young man when he's 12 years old and he's in a juvenile prison surrounded by others who do nothing else but crime. And there he spent 4 years of his life. And when he turned 17, he just turned 17, he was released and he was placed under the care of a couple, an elderly couple, whom he called Mom and Dad Adams. And Mom and Dad Adams took him in knowing exactly what they were in for, and they decided that they would show Paul Powers love. For the first time in his life, he discovered people who would forgive him when he did wrong, who would give him a second chance, who would not frown at him but smile at him, who would spend time with him, who would play with him, who would take him places, who were interested in his life. He had never experienced that before. And because of the love that those people showed him, he heard the call one day, obviously the call of God, but being made by a preacher, And he gave his heart to Jesus, not knowing what that really would result in, but he found out what it meant. It meant that something happened inside of him where he didn't want to be the way he was before. He wanted to be this new person that would be as happy and as kind as Mom and Dad Adams are. And Paul Powers became an entirely different person. 2 years later, he met this girl called Margaret. He fell in love with her. And as Margaret wanted to know more about him, he was a little ashamed about that, but he decided he'll tell her about his background. And she was very interested in him until she heard about his background. I mean, which girl is going to feel that her marriage is on a secure ground if she's marrying a guy who at 7 had lost not only his mother, but was now a victim of alcohol abuse? And then at 12, he killed a woman and he spent these 4 years in juvenile prison. What hope is there for her marriage? While he walked her on the beach one day, talking to her, trying to convince her that his life has changed, Margaret stopped. And she remarked that just as the tide came out on the beach and washed away their footprints, she remarked, maybe that's what's going to happen, that the tide will wash away our relationship. And they went home. And she went to her room. The romantic walk had turned into a disaster. And in her room, she took a piece of paper and she wrote down a poem. The poem was based upon the fact that I have to learn to trust God even when I cannot see Him working. And she wrote down the poem that has encouraged millions of people. You know that poem. It's called Footprints, written by Margaret. Footprints. Trusting God when I cannot even see Him working. And let me tell you, friend, Paul Powers did not become the righteous man that he became because he used willpower or grit or guts to get himself to change and be a new person. This man changed because the love that he experienced from Mom and Dad Adams, he could now become a righteous person because that love of God and his foster parents had changed him, and he could now transfer that love, demonstrating that righteousness to Margaret in her life. And I say to you, friend, there is no way ever that you can demonstrate the righteousness of God unless you are changed by the love of Jesus from Calvary. He has a rose to hand you. It's a rose of love coming straight from the cross. And He is saying, if that will change your heart, I can make you righteous so that you will demonstrate my righteousness in the world in which you live. It's the only way it's going to happen, and it will happen to you by the changing power of God's love. So what is our purpose? It is to be called by God out of being lost, not called by a stranger, but called by someone who wants us in a relationship with Him so that He can produce righteousness through us and we can demonstrate that righteousness in the world in which we live. But that purpose goes further. Because He says, yes, I, the Lord, have called you to demonstrate my righteousness. Please, everybody, read the next with me. It says, I will take you by the hand and guard you. How wonderful that this one life we have to live is lived with God taking us by the hand. Do you want any kind of other life? If God takes you by the hand and His hand is resting on you, you have no better life. It's like the story of Pastor Ernest Tittle in Illinois, who had a young parishioner. He went through a very rough time. This young parishioner, young man, lost his girlfriend, he lost his job, he lost his friends, and he was alone in life. And one night, the pastor noticed how that this young man left his house late at night, and he noticed the demeanor of this young man. He didn't see the pastor in the shadows at nighttime. He saw this demeanor of this young man was despondency. His head was hanging. His shoulders were stooped. He was so discouraged and despondent, and this young man started walking on the sidewalk, and Pastor decided to follow him several paces behind him just to see what's going to happen tonight. He was worried for this young man. And the young man walked the streets of Chicago, up and down, around blocks, all over the place. He would step off the road, off the curb, and cars would honk at him. He was not concentrating. His mind was elsewhere. He was so discouraged. His life, as it were, had ended. And the pastor followed him hour after hour. He got to the lakeside, and he walked along the side of the lake as the moon was coming up and moving over the sky. And this young man was just becoming more and more discouraged, hopeless. What shall he do with his life? And as he kept walking and the sun had just come up, he noticed that there was a sign, a street sign. And as he looked up to see the name of the street so that he would know where he is, that's when he noticed the pastor. And he was startled, and that's when the pastor walked right up to him. And the pastor simply put his hand on his shoulder, and he said, "Friend, come with me. Let's go home." And that hand on his shoulder, just that, gave him such hope that going home to him meant finding new purpose, new encouragement, new direction. The hand on his shoulder by his pastor. Has the hand of the Lord rested on your shoulder? His purpose for you is not that he would just call you, but he puts his hand on your shoulder because that hand means encouragement. It means direction. It means giving direction when you're lost. It means giving you hope when you're in despair. It means giving you comfort when you're in pain. His hand is on your shoulder. He, in fact, takes your hand. The one life you have to live is lived with God taking your hand and leading you in the purpose of life for which He has called you. You're not on your own. And now the most amazing thing of all, where God says in chapter 6, look at it again. I, the Lord, have called you to demonstrate my righteousness. I will take you by the hand and guard you, and you will be a light to guide the nations. Let that sink in for just a moment. You will be a light to the nations. Well, I thought that's what Jesus is. Yes, it is. But Jesus has reflectors all over the place. And His purpose is for you to reflect His light to the nations. And that is your purpose. I commend every one of you here today who work with people. Nursing, healing, constructing, teaching, caring, preparing taxes, doing gardening. I commend you for the work that you do that make a difference in people's life. I commend you for being the kind of person that cares about others to make a difference in their lives. But gently, I wish to ask you a question. Even as you have that career nailed down and you're working hard at that, and you may be preparing for a career even as you're still in high school, my question to you is simply this. Are you doing and will you be doing that work, that job, because you heard God call you to be a light to the people around you through that career, through that job, through that work that you are skilled at doing? Are you doing it because God has called you through that work to be a light to the people around you, a light that points people to Jesus through that work? So that work you do does not stand on its own. You don't do it for the sake of the work. You are doing it for the sake of being a light for Jesus, pointing people to Jesus. Or may I ask you, is your time and your energy and your skills used up by being successful in what you are doing so that there is no energy, no time left anymore in order for you to be a light guiding people to Jesus. If you spend 1 minute a day doing anything else but guiding people to Jesus, your purpose is failed for that 1 minute. Because we are called 24/7 to be the light of the nations, not just the light of the nations, but no, people who are called into a relationship with God, who then demonstrates His righteousness through us, who takes us by the hand so that we will be a light to the nations. How about it? Or are we so stuck in making a living, in being good at our work, and we've entirely forgotten about the purpose that God has given to us, that He can use me as a mechanic, as a farmer, as a nurse, as a teacher, as a pastor. He can use me in order to what? Point people to Jesus, be a light for Him. In Spain, there is a place called Segovia. In the year 109 AD, the Romans built this aqueduct in order to flow fresh, cool, living water from the mountains to this thirsty and dry and hot city for the people to quench their thirst. And for 1,800 years, that aqueduct carried that fresh living water to the people from the mountains so they could drink that water in that hot, dry city of Segovia. 1,800 years. That's more than 60 generations of people who benefited from the water flowing on this aqueduct that never failed. And then came a new generation in the early 1900s. And they decided they'd like to preserve the aqueduct. They want to keep it for ages in the future for their children to see and to remember and to look back on the history of this aqueduct and to be impressed by the work that it did. So they built new pipelines to carry the water, modern pipelines, PVC if you like, copper if you like. And they cut off the water from the aqueduct. No longer did the living water flow down from the mountains through the aqueduct. Now they had water through modern pipes. And the aqueduct began to change. The hot sun burning down on that dry aqueduct, no longer serving people with the water of life, began to turn the mortar into pulverized it. It dried out. The stones and the bricks began to sink and sag. This whole aqueduct began to disintegrate slowly. And through 1,800 years of constant service, that did not destroy the aqueduct. What destroyed it was disuse. No longer used to carry the water of life. And I say to you today, friend, that when your life is the aqueduct of God's love, flowing the water of life of Jesus into the lives of other people, you will be fulfilling your purpose. But if you should move it away, where you would now get involved with the modern pipes and let God's aqueduct run dry, in time you will begin to crumble. Your life will become meaningless. Your life will fall apart because no longer are you carrying the water of life as God has purposed it for you to be. Busy and doing well at other things, very successful, very impressive, moving forward, but not carrying the water of life. I ask you today, what is the purpose of your life? Where do you stand on that? Can I ask you this? Are you busy every day, no matter what your work is, to point people to Jesus? To introduce people to Jesus Christ? There are thousands of ways of doing it without being offensive. It simply means we have to accept our purpose and to let it flow. Let the righteousness of God flow through us. Let the light of Jesus flow through us. And you will be able to point people to Jesus even without knowing it. You see, you never need to tell the sun to shine. It's going to shine anyway because that's what it's made for. Can it be the day when we will be shining Jesus to the people around us? Not because we have to, not because we've adopted that. No, but that's why we are made. We are made for that. Imagine. Just imagine your life lived being a light for people to find Jesus. Your entire life. Your entire life. There is no such thing for Christians to have a section of their life where they now go out witnessing to people. That is such a deception, because then we think that this compartment of our lives are for witnessing, and this compartment is for fun, and that compartment is for work. God has called us, and His purpose for us is whatever we do to be witnesses for Jesus Christ. Amen. And I wonder if you would begin imagining your life, this one life given to you, that it be lived only to let the purpose of God be fulfilled in you. The poet said, only one life. It will soon pass. Only what is done for Christ will last. Amen.